Alright, shalom YouTube. So in this video what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly summarize what happened in the court case, right? So obviously if you watch the videos and what have you, which you'll see some people are arguing that, well, you did commit a crime and everything else. Let's first define what a crime is, right? A crime, for one, requires intent, right? So I had somebody commenting, well, you're creating a video while you're driving. It's like, yeah, people also, you know what, they Uber drivers and what have you, they have their phones there for a reason, and they do a lot of things too, which could be technically distracted driving, but also you have police officers doing the same thing and what have you. And what rights do the police officers have that the citizens don't have? They don't have any rights that supersede the rights of the citizens, right? So that would be that argument, right? So that's the problem that people have in modern society, is they don't understand linguistics, simple linguistics at that, and that would include police officers, because the law can't be violated under any condition. But then you have to look at the different layers of laws, right? You have lower level laws and you have higher level laws, and then you have the highest level law, the supreme law of the land, which is the United States Constitution, right? So in that regard of case law, very first one of the prominent case laws, and that still applies today, is Marbury versus Madison, which basically states that anything that's repugnant to the Constitution in the United States is automatically null and void, right? And since the United States Constitution on our Article 6, Section 2 states quite clearly that it's the supreme law of the land, and any law made in pursuance of, right, has to be in concurrence. If it's not, then it's, again, automatically null and void. So that includes states and what have you. So if you go to my website and what have you, you'll see that I have everything a lot more laid out. The Federalist Papers are there, Magna Carta, Charter of the Forest, Laws of the Duke, Charter of Liberties and Privileges, so on and so forth. Everything pre the United States and everything after the United States, right? For the most part. So I'm getting everything incorporated and linked out and everything. But bottom line is, law is law. So yeah, historically you had Jim Crow laws and what have you. And a lot of those contexts was it's a matter of public health and safety. Well, the truth is, public health and safety and welfare and everything else that they utilize when it comes to traffic infractions is more dependent on the police's ability to serve and protect, right? It's their primary job to secure and protect our rights. So if they're utilizing law or case law, we're able to mitigate your rights, they're not being law enforcement. They have an oath to the Constitution of the United States of America, as well as the respective states that they're in. And if they're in violation of that oath of office, in other words, violating your rights, that's Penal Code 195.00, official misconduct, to deprive a citizen of a right or a benefit, in other words. And that said, that's grounds for impeachment, removal from their office. That not only applies to police officers, it applies to any public official. Any mayors, governors, and the governor of the state that you're in has no authority to pardon that crime, because it is a crime. It's a Class A misdemeanor. High crimes and misdemeanors, right? So then you incorporate the fact that it's treason as well. That's Title 18, Section 2381. And if there's more than one police officer involved in the situation, it's Title 18, Section 2382, Misprision of Treason. So they're witnesses to the crime being committed, and they refuse to act upon it, and that's misprision of treason, right? So that's when they call for backup and what have you, when they're violating the rights. They're actually having accomplices help them out in their criminal activity, right? So put that into perspective with my rights being violated during that traffic infraction, right? Because the traffic infraction is not a crime. A crime, again, per definition, requires a victim. So it's not just a matter of intent, but it also requires a victim, right? So a crime, say for instance, if I were to steal from somebody, go rob somebody, break into their house and rob them, right? There is a victim, right? That's a crime, right? So I intended to do that and what have you. Now, if I was accidentally went through a stop sign and I caused injury to a person or property, caused harm to them or their property, that could likewise be considered a crime, technically. Now, if you understand the civil nature of everything, when it comes to damaging property, and when it comes to a vehicle accident, then you technically, in a vehicle accident, you do not have to contact the police in regards to it. It doesn't require the police to be involved in a civil manner like that because you have insurance and everything else, right? So the two parties involved could exchange information and then file a claim and what have you against the insurance and get everything situated in that accordance, so it doesn't require the police interaction. Police, if they got involved, the only thing that they would do is they would create a report to ensure that the person that was responsible for causing the problem was held accountable. And now they might also cite the person for various dynamics of traffic infractions to substantiate their claim, which is basically administrative fee, right? Just cause for them to come out and just compensation, so to speak, for them to come out and assess the situation, right? Because there is a victim. But it's still not a requirement. Either party in that situation can contact the police and get them involved. It's their option, that's their right. Now, if it's a situation where a person were injured in an accidental traffic infraction violation, then the police have to get involved. Because a person was injured, there's a literal injured person. Now that would be law and way where it's a little bit more than insurance and way because there's more substantial aspects in play where, well, it's what's the insurance going to cover and what have you. So that's why the police would get involved, and that's where they have to be involved. And I agree wholeheartedly in that account that if there is a person injured, then there should be the police interaction. So it's not just a matter of citing traffic infractions and what have you too. But if there is no injured party, society cannot be the victim, right? So I'm eventually going to have it up on my website, the citations themselves and where it states quite clearly that the victim was society. So society can't be a victim of a traffic infraction where there was actually literally no injured citizen, right? You have to have an injured citizen for there to be to their property or to themselves for it to be a crime. And in that sense, if it were a traffic infraction that was even accidentally and not intentionally done, then it would be criminal negligence, right? Because now I'd be negligent based on my negligence. I caused injury to somebody, right? So that's that differentiation of everything in classification, because certain people were, again, trying to assert, well, you're making videos while you're driving down the road and maybe that's a crime because you have intent. It's like you don't understand the definition of a crime, right? And in particular, since there is no victim, again, there is no crime, right? So I have lawyers, I have police officers, ex-police officers, and whatever that substantiate my exact claims because they understand the dynamics a little bit more thoroughly. They also understand their oath of office, and they understand that there's a lot of corruption within the system in and of itself. Where I've even seen YouTube videos where one police officer pulled over another police officer for speeding, and they wrote him a citation, what have you, and because they hated him, right? They could have let him off like anything else, like anybody else could be let off, but because they hated that person, that particular police officer, they wrote them a citation which would cause them injury to their job and their livelihood, right? So that's why it's not just me arguing on a citizen level. I understand that it's more a matter of people utilizing their feelings and conjecture to deprive people of their rights and their possessions and their livelihood, right? Look what happened when it came to mask mandates and vaccine mandates, right? Deprivation of rights under the color of law, and you want to have state and federal officials that claim that they have that level of sovereignty over the people to dictate to the people what they have to do, depriving them of their rights and property and what have you without due process of law, because their feelings tell them that they're doing what they're doing is right. So I can understand the dynamics. I haven't gone to college for engineering. If it were actually like a literal airborne pathogen or what have you that was causing a multitude of deaths and what have you, well beyond what COVID did, where substantial losses were there and relevant, making it relevant for the deprivation of rights to that degree. But I wouldn't give the government that level of authority, because you can see what happened when COVID happened, that they abused it. If you give the government any level of authority, they abuse that authority. Look at this minor traffic infraction, which wasn't a crime. And then you watch what they did, because I called 911 to report their criminal activity, because the First Amendment is not just a matter of complete separation of church and state. As a Messianic Jew, if you're non-compliant with the Ten Commandments, you're one of the children of Hashatan, right? And so the police and their dynamic, being unaware of their dynamic, they're acting like they're the royal priesthood. They're acting like they're the church. They're acting like they're the priests, and they're trying to get the people to repent from their sins. That's what a violation of the law is. That's because everything has been changed in modern dynamics to where you're sinning against the state, and because you sinned against the state, we get to punish you. When the reality is we don't live in a monarchy or an oligarchy of stupidity. The rights of the people supersede state and federal authority. So if a law that violates the rights of the people, it's automatically null and void, right? You can even see that in the Penal Code of New York State. If you go to the Penal Code of New York State and the first parts of it, and you can find that likewise on my website, it literally dictates that it's to be liberally construed to a degree. I forget the exact terminology, but basically it means that it's not to be absolutely enforced on the people based on, it's more a matter of figuring out what the justice is. So if it's injustice, which is violating the rights of the people, it shouldn't be enforced, right? So I was trying to assert my Christian name as one dynamic, which under common law is still a right of the people. If you don't believe that, then you can go to my website again. You'll find the New York State Civil Rights Code, and under, I think it's section 64A, subdivision 4, I believe it is, it states that it's common law right of the people to change their name at will, and that's referring to the identification procedures and what have you, what the ID that people have, the government issue ID, but it's with regard to their ID or the marital status or single, what have you, they can change their name at their discretion as long as they use it consistently. So the argument that in certain cases where the ID is required is not only unconstitutional, it's a violation of civil rights under the First Amendment, because again, a lot of different dynamics, even if you look at the Pope and what have you, where and various priests and bishops and nuns and what have you, they changed their names. I mean, Cassius Clay changed his name to Muhammad Ali. Do you think he legally registered it? What about the actors and what have you? Everybody can change their name. Certain people legalize it going through the state process and what have you, but nevertheless, you don't have to. If you use it consistently, then that's your right to change it with it, and you don't have to have the government giving you authorization to utilize that name, as long as you're not intending to defraud anybody. So in the true Christian principle, I was asserting my Christian name, which is under the First Amendment, but it still falls under the common law, to where in that dynamic, especially considering the situation, the separation of church and state, rebuking devils because they're children of Hashatan, they're trying to instill a secular mentality on the church. That's partial. That they're not allowed to do that. They're trying to get me to comply with their mentality. That's a violation of that First Amendment. So that said, because again, they're trying to control my thoughts, they don't have that authority, right? There is no victim, so they have no authority. That would go back to the New York State Civil Rights Code, Section 2, to where it states supreme sovereignty in the people. No authority under any pretense whatsoever can be exercised over the citizens without consent of the people. So in other words, the rights of the people supersede the authority of the state. That's the 10th Amendment, right? States whatever's not on the federal level goes to the state or the people, not exclusively to the state. So whenever there's a public official within any given state that tries to assert a level of authority over the people that's not granted to them by the Constitution, because they have that oath of office to the Constitution, then they're in violation of their oath, and they can be removed from their office, respectively, for violating Penal Code in New York State anyway, Penal Code 195.00, official misconduct, and I'm sure each state has a relative official misconduct penal code, right? So that's grounds for removal. you get them impeached and you can charge them criminally, right? So when it came to everything as it stands, I was trying to represent myself pro se or pro per, which is my right likewise to face my accuser, right? In a court of law, it doesn't matter if it's criminal or if it's civil. I can face my accuser, and they're trying to mandate that I have a lawyer represent me, right? Why would I want a devil representing me? Because a lawyer has an oath of office of the Constitution, but likewise, if you understand corpus, juris secundum, and everything else, and my particular dynamic to where they're not being compliant with the Ten Commandments, they're devils. They're going to have a devil represent me, right? Especially considering I talked to briefly and not willingly, technically, to the public defender, and I told him my situation, that I did identify on the 911 call, and he said, well, I think you need to present them with your ID. And he said, I think. He didn't cite a law, and I don't see any law that's relevant to that particular situation. Nobody can cite that law because it doesn't exist. Because it's not a requirement for you to present ID, because case law, which is also can be found on my website, states quite clearly that you are not required to present an ID when you're being charged with anything, right? Even if it's criminal, right? There's no requirement as long as you provide like your name and your date of birth and what have you. Because why would the government have to be involved with an ID for anything in that court? So I can understand the efficiency of it, making sure you're charging somebody appropriately and you have photo identification. But do the Amish have driver's licenses? Well, they're driving around in horse and buggy. They're driving around in horse and buggy, right? But they still aren't required to have a driver's license. Now, I could appeal to that same dynamic because they asserted under the 10th Amendment, under the 10 Commandments, that it's a matter of no other gods before me, no images and what have you, likenesses and blah, 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 in that 10th, one of the 10 Commandments. So they have that justification, but in that dynamic, it can also debunk the reason why the Amish aren't really following the 10 Commandments, right? So I'm technically a little bit more strict, but I'm technically also a lot more lenient, right? So you can see me driving around in motor vehicles and everything else and doing all these various dynamics that you won't see them doing because that's my right. So you look at all the different case laws and everything else, and the Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under the color of law, because the rights of the people supersede the authority of the state. Then you have Title 18, Section 241, which is conspiracy against rights, which applies. They kidnapped me, false arrest, because I did identify, and which, again, is one. They cited me with Penal Code 195.05. They violated Penal Code 195.00. They escalated into a crime to try to make it a criminal procedure. Put me through a 730 psych eval, which was unconstitutional because Article 1, Section 3 of the New York State Constitution states quite clearly that I cannot be deemed incompetent. They deemed me incompetent anyway. The judge wrote off a final order for me to be remanded to be institutionalized for a period not longer than 90 days. I wasn't given due process. There was no trial. So I have a right to a public trial and everything else, all these various rights, and you can go to my website to validate it. So I don't have any obligation to abide by the court order because they can't deem me incompetent. He was the incompetent one because he's violating my rights. That's Penal Code 195.00. In a court of law, he just violated the law. He's there to uphold the law, so if he's in violation, he shouldn't be in his office. He should be removed from his office, right? So that applies to him, that applies to the police officers, it applies to the DA. So if they take any action against me, they're in violation of the law. So after the court case and what have you concluded, and I uploaded the videos, I sent an email when I did get notice in the mail from the forensic psychiatrist center and what have you, because it was sent to me certified, and I wasn't home to retrieve it, and I wasn't ever going to retrieve it anyway. I'm not under any obligation to retrieve certified mail from them. So that said, they had no right in that accord, so I sent them an email because I saw where it was coming from. Obviously, just went to the website, 400 Forest Avenue, Buffalo Psychiatric, found an email address, sent an email to them as well as the court clerk, gave them the full detail, and you can see the emails, all the emails on my website in regards to the case, back and forth between me and the DA, asserting my rights, right? I told him quite clearly that if you proceed and do any action against me from this point on, I never consented, and it would be, again, in violation of my rights. And I asserted hate crimes and everything else, and likewise, everything was asserted with the Federal Division of Civil Rights, right, which goes to the FBI for investigation. First two complaints they couldn't do anything about because of pending criminal action being brought against me, but after I was deemed incompetent, which the case was dismissed under the 730 psych eval. The third complaint was after that fact. After the case was dismissed, I haven't got notification from them back, and it's been nearly 2 months. So my guess is they're probably doing a proper investigation of the situation because, again, the rights of the people supersede the authority of the state. So you can argue it as much as you want, but my rights were violated. The police broke the law. I didn't. Shalom.